Hey everybody, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm joined by Natalya Murakhver. She's a co-founder of Restore Childhood, which is a phenomenal organization. She's a big free speech advocate, and if you're a listening audience not on YouTube, you cannot see her shirt that has a big free speech emblazoned across her chest in the sort of the old baseball stylistic, like a baseball jersey with speech underlined with the H coming off as a tail. It's lovely, and I kind of want one, and I kind of want to turn it into my own full button jersey. But hello, Natalia.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jake. And I love how you pronounce my last name. It's perfect.
When you have a last name that's Wisconsin, you learn very quickly to be sensitive to other people's pronunciations.
Yeah, well, I mean, but you can do it, so it's great. And we have the t-shirt. We actually have it on our Restored Childhood website, so people can buy it. We have a bunch of different free speech t-shirts. We literally just printed them up, and I just feel like this is an important thing to advertise.
I do try to patronize as many of my guests as I can if they have things for sale. So that might be the first thing I buy. There's another free speech advocate who's a friend of the show, shall we say, named Chloe Carmichael. She's a
Oh,
psychologist. You know Chloe, yeah.
yes, I do.
She's wonderful,
Yeah.
and I'll bet she would jump all over that too. I also bought her books for everybody here at Zephyr, so they can understand why free speech is important to mental health. But tell us about you, where you come from, how this all emerged. Of course, the origin story, if you will. But let's hear a little bit about you personally.
Well, thanks for asking me. Everybody wants to talk about themselves, so I'm no different. It's fun. But I will apologize in advance. I'm in New York City and I have my windows open. So if you feel like there's too much noise, let me know and I'll close them and suffocate. But I'll be okay.
I have a soundboard. I could just drop in a trombone too.
Okay. Um, okay.
I never get to use
Yeah.
the
So
soundboard.
So I live in New York City, in Manhattan. I've been here. I came to the United States from the Soviet Union, which thankfully no longer exists. I was born in Odessa, Ukraine, which thankfully does still exist. I've been here for about 48 years. I came here as a 6-year-old, and I'm 54 now. And with a brief interlude in Los Angeles after college, because I desperately wanted to work in the film industry, I've lived in New York City all my life. So during the pandemic, I had two elementary school daughters. They were in kindergarten and in third grade at the time. And when school shut down, I was very, very concerned because as a parent, I feel tremendous responsibility to protect every aspect of my child's upbringing. And also, I think you and I were talking before we rolled the camera. It's very, very finite. Childhood is extremely finite. Every developmental milestone is unique. Children talk at a certain age, walk at a certain age. Puberty comes, in a certain range of ages. Like these things can't be moved. So we need to be able to kind of safeguard them. And I was worried that when schools closed, we would no longer be able to do that. And adults would continue, we're kind of static and less evolving in many ways. But for children, I was deeply concerned about the implications of it. And I'm not even talking about just learning loss. I don't even like that term. I think it was like profound loss on all levels. Like yeah, and it can't be like learning loss almost reduces it to something that could be taught via a Zoom, which we know it couldn't because it wasn't just about times tables, even though that was important too. So I was one of the first open schools parents here in New York City. I am a Democrat, or I was. I'm still registered as a Democrat because in New York City you can't vote in primaries unless you are a registered Democrat, and the Democratic candidate generally becomes the mayor or the city council member or whatever. So I attended the very first open schools rally. We were called Keep NYC Schools Open. There was a petition to reopen schools and keep them open despite rising COVID levels. There were rallies, there were marches, there were press conferences. They were all pretty poorly attended because none of them were orchestrated or paid for by Soros or the Tides Foundation or any of these organizations that have created these massive protests in major cities around the country. We didn't have coordinated t-shirts. My t-shirt didn't exist yet. We were just kind of coming together for a very, very small purpose, and that was just to keep our kids safe and to protect the city's kids. We had 1.1 million public school kids in New York City. Up at that point, we did. Now we have far fewer because anyone who could leave has left. Probably have like less than 900,000. And there I was exposed to many different parents who all wanted the same thing. They realized that the school closures seemed to be pretty politically driven. Children were not big spreaders of COVID. They were not a danger to teachers. School was probably the safest place to be because teachers, as Scott Atlas says in our documentary 15 Days, schools were probably the safest place to be because teachers are one of the youngest professions, and COVID was an age stratified virus. And so that brought me into this whole advocacy space. I didn't start out trying to be like an advocate. In fact, my background is in food studies, and I was more of an advocate in food allergy space because my daughter has food allergies before COVID, and I was just trying to get proper labeling and also just empower her with the latest research so she could perhaps outgrow it one day.
That's well, where do we go from there? So I don't I think enough postmortem has been done on COVID and the lies that we were told and led to believe, and I don't really care to get into that too much. I am interested in the process that has unfolded since then. Certainly, people found each other through social media. We rallied. I try to do my part here in Northern Nevada. I have a big, uh, I guess you could say my bailiwick is emotional functioning. I've studied a lot, and we learned that children and adults communicate through facial expressions. And so masking was a big problem for me on many levels, not just the sinister nature of covering people's faces by government fiat, but the lack of childhood development adequately across their short lifespan. We have a very narrow window to teach kids how to communicate properly. So that was a big problem for me. But as we know, we've moved through, we fought the battles. Now let's fast forward up to 2026. You released the 15 days. Talk a little bit about that, the process of putting it together, because it almost seems like a retrospective, perhaps, but we're moving forward because there's always more battles to fight when it comes to safeguarding children's developmental processes, retaining their innocence for as long as possible, and really keeping them from being exposed to things that outstrip their developmental capacity to digest, absorb, gain discernment on what is truth versus falsehood. And there's a lot of directions we could go there. But tell me how things are today and what the movie, the documentary's reception has been. Congratulations, by the way, for getting back into filmmaking. That was apparently your the one true love.
Yeah, I remember somebody saying, if there's anything else you can do, do it. Don't make films. But I think I've always gravitated towards storytelling. I was really inspired as a Soviet Jew who came here because of Carter and Brezhnev's agreement to allow the Jews to leave in the late 70s. I followed Steven Spielberg's career. Not a huge fan necessarily of his, narrative films. I think they're a little bit too showy for me. Some are better than others. But I was really inspired by the fact that he produced the Shoah Foundation films, which are the testimonials of Holocaust survivors that he was able to capture before their passings, because he saw how finite their time was, and he knew that once their stories were gone, once they were gone, their stories would be gone with them. So that kind of always stayed with me, that he had that foresight. And combined with the fact that I was in New York City during 9/11, and I was just about 30 years old, and I lived on the Upper West Side, which is about 2.5 3 miles away from Ground Zero. And when 9/11 happened, it was so unprecedented, and I still don't really have words for what I felt that day. I just it it surpassed any of the horror that I had felt before. I mean, I'd heard about, and learned a lot about the Holocaust, but that was so distant. And I have family in Israel, very close family. My grandmother was there, my cousins, my aunt and uncle, and I spent quite a bit of time there. And I knew the terror that they had always endured, and I, felt it when I was there as well. But again, none of that came close to experiencing something like a 9/11 on our own soil. It felt like virgin soil, which in some ways it was. And so I know that for the first 6 months after 9/11, all I could talk about and think about was 9/11. Like like every dimension you could possibly try to look at. I mean, it was before like the real golden age of the internet, so there was only so much, but there was enough information where, between the TV and the newspapers, I was still reading the New York Times at the time. I was able to kind of sate myself and build what I felt was an accurate picture of what had happened and try to start healing. So, but I knew that like so it was 6 months. 6 months I was absolutely obsessed. But after 6 months, I remember going to California and people would want to talk about 9/11, and it was the last thing I ever wanted to hear about again. I was done. I had processed it. I had sealed up my grief. I was fortunate enough not to have lost anyone who I was personally, connected to, but of course we lost so many. And so I just didn't want to talk about it anymore. Like if you had asked me, on day 10 or, even day 30 or 40, I would have talked about it at length. If you asked me at 6 months, I would just shut down and be done with it. So I tried to learn from that and thought to myself as the schools were reopening and I had established all these relationships with doctors and free speech advocates, parents, kids around the country. I needed to get to them as quickly as possible because I was worried that their 6 months would seal them up. And so I had this idea to make this film, of course, no title at the time, but I had just started Restore Childhood because I had a collective of doctors called Urgency of Normal. We all had come together in 2022. I think you're familiar.
Yeah, I've
And we're
signed it.
yeah, and it was like a toolkit for parents to advocate for the removal of all the mandates, particularly mask mandates in their kids' schools. And it was a very popular, very viral toolkit that, we were accused of taking dark money and being funded by, some nefarious sources. But in fact, the toolkit was written by a virologist from the Bay Area named Scott Balsitis and had been kind of organized by Tracy Beth Hogue, who is a friend and was at the FDA until recently, but she wasn't at the FDA at the time. She was a doctor. Do you know Tracy? Are
I
you
know
guys familiar?
I really would like to interview her too. I have not we've never met, but Lu Lucy McBride was I think part of that too and
Yes, she was.
yeah, really good people. But yeah, it's crazy you bring that up because I'd almost box that up and compartmentalize that part of my life too because it was so turbulent and I still get viscerally angry when I think back to what was done to us, right? It was very pernicious, very calculated. I think,
It was. It definitely
and
was.
yeah, and it shows the power of people when they start rallying, organically, how we can get things changed because we could have just rolled over and been in a very different position these days. But anyway, sorry. Yes, please go on.
Well, I mean, the idea of like the virgin, territory and the attack of not the 9/11 attack really felt like it was like breaking this chasm. Like, I don't know. I thought I was living in one place, but after 9/11, I was no longer living in that place. It was a different place
Yeah.
entirely. And, I think of life before 9/11 and life after 9/11. That's just how it's always been in my world since
Yeah.
then. And I think with the pandemic, it was another sort of seismic event. And I think you're right about the planning. I think that the unions and the other forces that engineered this catastrophe on a global scale had, again, the playbooks, and we didn't. We were like virgin, minds. Like we had no chance. Except for people like you and me and Tracy and Jay Bhattacharya and people who refused to roll over and just kept pushing back. I mean, we couldn't reverse everything quickly enough, of course. Like there are many, many casualties, and there still will be many more. But if there hadn't been people who had pushed back, we would be in far worse shape. So yeah, so Tracy and I connected pretty early on, and I had I felt just like you did about the child masking. It was absolutely excruciating to drop my children off at school and know that they had to pull their masks up over their noses and mouths during like the most precious, wonderful years where they should be looking at each other, smiling at each other, having teachers interact with them and being put in this like isolation in a way, really kind of a lonely world in these classrooms. And, people were like, well, why'd you send your kids, homeschool? It's like that. I think sending the kids was still the right thing to do because I saw how happy they were going into the building and how happy they were coming out. Yes, it exacted a toll, but I was one of the parents who, told them, if you have to pull it down, do it. Like, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Like, you bend the rules wherever you can and still maintain good standing. I'm on your side. You won't be in trouble with me if like you get in trouble with them. Like, yeah, you need to always keep your kids closest. So urgency of normal started because I asked Randy Weingarten, the head of the second largest teachers union in our country, the AFT, if she would meet to discuss getting the masks off of children. She had done an AFT roundtable with Jay Bhattacharya and Tracy Hogue and the Open Schools USA parents in 2021. And I saw that she was open to having conversations with parents. I didn't believe that it was going to be in good faith. But at that point, it was clear that she was in charge of school policy, and the New York Post and Fox had revealed that she had been orchestrating the CDC school reopening guidelines and the masking guidelines. And I thought, well, why not go to the source, And so she agreed to meet with me, and we met for a gin and tonic on the Upper West Side in 2021, at the end of 2021. And I asked her if she would work with the CDC to get our kids' masks off. I mean, it's just so funny, like if you think about it, right? Like
Like,
I was,
how are we even having this conversation, right? Like, I don't mean you and me. I mean you and her. Like,
it
it's just
was,
so bizarre. Why? Where did we? Yeah. How, yes, it
it
is.
was so
It
weird.
was
It
inverted
was
reality.
It was. And, she's very charming, and it is important to meet people like that face to face because you understand like their power and how charismatic they can be, how smart and, well read they are, and just like their ability to connect with people, even if you are resistant to that connection. She has incredible tentacles, and they're very, very powerful, and it's exciting to be given attention by somebody like that, whether they're on the right side of things or the wrong side of things. It's still like that force, right? So we had a drink and a very pleasant conversation, and she said, "Well, if you would like to present me with a proposal to get the masks off, I will see if I can get it to the CDC." So I said, okay, well, I'll do that. I'll call Tracy and see if she will work with me on this. So I called Tracy Hogue, and the next morning, and I said, "Would you work with me on this proposal?" And she was like, "Of course, I'll work on anything." But she said, "I just want you to understand that like there can't be like a plan to get the masks off. Masks are useless." And they just need to come off. There's no data behind them at all. And if we give them an off ramp, then we'll have another on ramp to get back on again. I never
Yeah.
forgot that conversation. So Tracy and I just like exchanged emails and calls over the next few months trying to figure out what to do. And we had, sorry, fire truck. We had announced on Twitter at the time, it wasn't X yet, that we were doing this. So people would constantly reach out and say, "Did you come up with your plan yet? Did you come up with your plan yet?" And I sat here with my husband in our living room going, "Well, maybe if we do the food pyramid upside down with like the most effective to least effective, interventions." I don't know. We tried everything. It was all stupid. Tracy, to her credit, was an uncompromising, unflinching scientist and refused to support anything that wasn't completely evidence-based, which I love her for. And eventually she went I guess she had a meeting with Scott Balsidis, who had children in a Bay Area school who were suffering from mask mandates. And she saw this incredible toolkit that he had written as a virologist, totally evidence-based. Everything was supported. And we ended up bringing that out and using that as the toolkit for urgency of normal, around which we coalesced an incredible group of scientists, like you said, Lucy McBride, Vinay Prasad, at the beginning, Monica Gandhi. They couldn't all keep their names on because they were getting intimidated at the hospitals
Yeah.
they were working at. There were doctors we had at the beginning because we did a Zoom call too. It's actually on the website, Urgency of Normal. It's still all up there. We did a Zoom call, and some of the doctors on that Zoom call got harangued at the hospitals and had to remove their names. So talk about freedom of speech.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really sinister. And then it didn't stop there. I mean, California introduced that AB 2098 ridiculousness to suppress doctors from even being doctors in their own offices, which fortunately failed.
Yeah,
Um, and that's a free speech issue because if I, as a practicing clinician, am not allowed to say certain things within the bounds of my own competence, what good am I? And
yeah,
when you're talking about life and death situations, maybe me with suicide prevention and mental health, or them with actual medical interventions, pharmaceuticals, whatnot, if it, just think about the chilling effect that a government mandate has over the autonomy of a practicing physician or clinician to give what they believe is the best intervention strategy within the realm of their highly trained competence, as determined by the state in which they practice. Like, now you're not even practicing medicine. You're doing something akin to witchcraft at that point, but with a government mandate. And for the listening audience who's maybe unfamiliar with the strictures in which we operate, if if we step outside of what is determined by the powers that be, it could be the state, it could be the licensing board, it could be the CDC, it could be whatever, wherever they draw their so-called authority for certain levels of intervention, irrespective of the illness. If we step outside of that, we can be accused of malpractice, and without the ability to practice, our careers are torpedoed. Now, I'm beneficial enough, or what am I saying? I'm blessed enough to be in a profession where talking is the intervention. I don't prescribe anything. I don't have to have access to equipment or facilities or surgical tools, so I can literally do this anywhere. So if my license were to be stripped, I could still just keep talking to people, right? And if they really found me interesting, they could pay me for that. But that's not the case with medical doctors. They need access to pharmacies and prescriptions and so forth. So it's really deleterious to care access when the government decides that there's only certain things that can be done for certain medical presentations. So you get some doctors who are like, well, I've studied some different things, and I think X intervention is going to work, but the government's only allowing me to use Y intervention. That can really harm people. And that's why I say it was very sinister and very pernicious for this, I guess you call it a movement to emerge, because you're really harming the very people that government is allegedly supposed to be protecting. And that's the whole reason behind licensing. We're supposed to establish a minimum level of competence so that we help the most people without harming them. And here's the government coming in saying, actually, we're going to tell you what you can and cannot do within the confines of your own clinical setting. It was very scary. Nobody wants to lose their ability to practice. Nobody wants to lose their livelihood, especially if you got, student loan debt hanging over your head or whatever that you got to pay off, and you can't just do that working at Walmart. So that's the backdrop about why this is so important, why free speech matters. Because if you strip away my ability to treat as I see fit, um, we're going to end up with some really detrimental outcomes to humans who are ailing, and that's exactly what occurred. That's exactly what happened.
Exactly. And Laura Powell, who's an attorney in the
Laura's
Bay
great.
Area, yeah,
Yep.
she and Azadeh Khatibi and Tracy Hogue and Janine Eunice, all an NCLA legal, fought AB 2098 and got it removed. I mean, that's a huge, they're totally unsung heroes of this, so you asked about the film. We did Urgency of Normal, and it gave me an incredible opportunity to connect with these great doctors who were willing to risk everything. And one of the doctors that I didn't get to connect with during Urgency of Normal through the toolkit was Jay Bhattacharya, because he was so blacklisted, like he was untouchable. It's really unbelievable. He didn't even sign Urgency of Normal because he didn't want to tarnish us with his shadow. He of course supported everything. He's now the head of the NIH and the interim head of the CDC, although I think they've found somebody. But this is a giant in public health, and also incredibly humble and
He's a
um,
great
and
man.
a really great man, a real great hero for our time. And so after the toolkit rolled out and we were able to push back on the mask mandates, I'd like to think we made some difference. Many of them started to fall away in 2022 after the toolkit came out. And parents reached out to us from all over the world. It wasn't just the United States. Like they asked for translations. We did translations. My husband did the website. My friend Jean did the logo. There was no money at all, but somebody reached out and said, you should start a nonprofit and I'll help you get it started. So it was a very generous person who gave me a little bit of money to start a nonprofit. And that's where Restore Childhood came from. And so the next project that I thought of was the film, because we had just successfully pushed back on the mandates to the best ability that we had. And now we needed to keep those stories so that they wouldn't be twisted, and so that Randy Weingarten wouldn't say, oh, yes, I tried to reopen schools, which is what she says every time. And, she had all those cunning photo moments of, the school reopening guidelines. She would like wave that up because she knew it's all like once you
It was
start working on.
theatrical.
Yeah, well, also once you start working on a film like this and you look for archival material, and I had a very seasoned, very senior archival producer who worked with me, Hawk Jensen, who's an incredible filmmaker of his own. You can't even find good clips or good archival bits of Randy Weingarten because everything is so carefully curated, including her testimony in Congress, that it's hard to get the sound bites like you could get them from me or from you, like to make us look bad. Like hers mostly make her look good because she had a script that she was reading off of the entire damn time. So anyway, so I started working on the film and went all over the country with my friend Stephanie Edmonds, who is still working with me at Restore Childhood. She was a teacher who lost her job at a Bronx high school, public high school, because of the vaccine mandates. She refused to comply, and so they didn't keep her there. She got fired, and so she was a single mom with a young son, and she needed a job. And I mentioned to her that I wanted to make this film, and she was already making great Instagram videos. Like she'd never made a film, but the first thing we did together was we made a video that was a takeoff of The Sun Will Come Out Tomorrow, the Little Orphan Annie song, and it was The Mask Will Come Off Tomorrow. And we have a video and the song. It was recorded by her friend's daughter. It's really good. We released it and it was somewhat viral on Twitter and on YouTube. And from there, we kind of got a little more empowered. And I said, we need to make a documentary. We have access to all these stories. And I think, we should like save them and get them in the can as quickly as we can. And somebody was kind enough to introduce me to an incredible filmmaker, Eli Steele, who had made What Killed Michael Brown. He's Shelby Steele's son. Shelby Steele was a Hoover Institute fellow and wrote White Guilt and probably is one of the greatest thinkers in this country. Black conservative writer and thinker. And anyway, so Eli was kind enough to mentor me and help me figure out everything from, what equipment to buy and, what not to do and how to, proceed through like this crazy, like very grassroots kind of filmmaking, because that's his favorite way to do things too. So he was just, speaking from incredible experience. And so we went on the road and started doing interviews, and it took 2.5 years. And we did about like 56 interviews. Most of them are not in the film. The film is only an hour and 9 minutes long. You can't do a film with that many interviews. People would lose their minds. As it was, like, Stephanie, who was editing a lot of it for me, would yell at me and go, "We can't keep everybody in." I'm like, "But he said that this was so good. We can't, come on, we have to keep this guy in." It's like, okay. So we have more people than we probably would have if it was like a commercial film. But one of the best interviews we did, I mean, they were all great, but was with Jay Bhattacharya. We went to Stanford and interviewed Tracy Hogue and Jay Bhattacharya and others and Scott Atlas and people like that. But Jay was great because it was just before the Twitter files broke. So, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he opened up, the Twitter files basically and let all these journalists and thinkers in to see how their speech had been suppressed during the Biden administration's, like, pushing of censorship rules to social media companies. And Jay Bhattacharya was one of the people who got access to that. But and at that point, his name became even bigger. But, when we interviewed him in December 2022, just days before the Twitter files, he was a professor at Stanford. He was definitely well known for the Great Barrington Declaration, but he was still, also mostly unknown. So he could give us a lot more time than we would ever get after that. We spent, a few hours of, a couple of days with him, followed him around the Stanford campus. He showed us where his favorite coffee place was and how he bought his coffee so sweet. And then he showed us where his mugshot was hanging during COVID because he refused to lock down and shut up. And so he got death threats and they put his picture up and, this is the place, and said, Jay Bhattacharya is like an enemy of the people or something. This is the place he'd been at since he was 18 years old. This was his home. Like, and so just an incredible betrayal of a very, very great human. It was a really painful experience, listening to his stories, but I'm really grateful that we have them.
Yeah, it maps nicely to what you teed up with earlier about the Spielberg covering of the Holocaust survivors, and I have some other friends that I've connected with, as I mentioned before we started recording, who are across the country and throughout the world, really, who some of whom have been accumulating receipts and just storing them quietly. And we've had this thing in mind where like we should publish what we remember, right? And some of it's trickled out in various forms. Yours certainly contributes to that, and you're doing the work now. But it's nice to recapture this because people might ask like, well, what's the point now? It's over. Let's move on. But the point is never again, right? Like when we say never again, we mean never again. And if we lose memory because the stories get lost or scrubbed from the internet or whatever, digital archives can be manipulated, then the next generation has no idea what happened and they could succumb to the same processes. So as you're moving forward now, I assume that is the thinking behind your work and your effort and your group's effort. You got all this remainder footage. Are you going to do a second installment, like a supplement or an outtake version, or?
I mean, initially we talked about doing like an 8-part series, but
Oh,
it just
wow.
it didn't really work.
It's
And
got to go
it's
somewhere
so
though, right? I mean,
yeah. I mean, I would like to, and I've kind of like forgotten about this, but I do want to have the 15 days, like uh, school closures, like interactive digital museum exhibit where we
oh,
have the different stories edited. I mean, it's just very expensive. So
yeah.
if there's a donor who can help us get this done, I think it'd be great because, we interviewed people like Aaron Cariotti who didn't make it into this film, but whose story certainly should be told. And he was a UC Irvine, like a psychiatrist and a bioethics professor who lost his job because he refused to take a COVID
Yeah.
shot after recovering from COVID.
Yeah, yeah, but and many such stories, right? Like it's wild how suppressive the powers that be made it happen, right? It's
Yeah,
crazy how we just it turned on a dime. There's some people who say, COVID revealed who you really were, all along. Maybe we were fat, dumb, and happy, taking it easy, opulent in America, not really having to think too much, taking our freedoms for granted. And then this happened, and some people turned into the tyrants, and some people turned into the freedom fighters. But it was kind of there all along, and it forged, or maybe through the crucible, uh, made manifest what people's true depths were the entire time. And it was really tough. Like you shared Jay's story, and it's reminiscent of some other folks I'm aware of, and it is sad because it didn't need to happen that way. We could have had reasonable discourse, and one has to wonder. That's why I love emotional functioning. One has to wonder why the fear, why the contempt, why the hatred, where did this come from, and why is it so powerful still, and how do you push through it, the next time, or the next iteration of whatever is going to be attempted to be stolen, and that's really what we're looking for now. You mentioned earlier that the playbook is where it is. They're on to the next chapter. What do we do, right? We have to respond somehow. Pick up
speak
from there
up.
if you want.
Honestly, the speak up part is the most important because the self-censorship is probably the most damaging thing we do.
Yeah.
The good news is this is no longer virgin territory. Like people have been through this, I don't even like to use the word trauma anymore because it's like so
Oh,
political. But this
well, it's been
event
weaponized too.
yeah, it's just like I think it's being used to make people feel like they're perpetual victims, which I don't have any patience for. I'm sorry. Like, no.
Yeah.
But Abigail Schreier has taught me a lot on that, and I'm very grateful to her for her writing and her speech. But and Dennis Prager too. She did a great interview with Dennis Prager where like she was like, you're, in a wheelchair and, paralyzed from the, face down or whatever. And how do you think of it? How do you contextualize all this? He said, well, instead of thinking why me, I always think why not
Why
me?
not me? Yep.
I thought that was such a great thing. It's like a great framework for everything. I'm like, like no, there's no victims. We're just gonna have to keep plowing through. But I think that all of this is still very important. I actually don't think that the how to recognize it when it happens again is as much of an issue for me because I don't think it's the same. Like I think it actually still happening. Like I don't think it ever ended. I think people think the pandemic and the school closures and all that tyranny was like a chapter that we closed. And I did used to think that for a while. But and maybe in some countries that there's more of an argument for that. But in this country, I don't think so. I think it was actually like the prologue. Um, to,
Explained. I'm curious about this. I hadn't heard that before, but I'm curious.
um, so I don't if you've seen the film or if you haven't, we were able to find some really great conversations that the DSA, they weren't DSA, they were DSA aligned groups were having in March
DSA, Democratic
2020.
Socialists of America, you mean?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So, all these USAID company NGOs that were getting all this like funding from the Biden administration, and were pushing the social justice, climate justice, environmental justice, racial justice agendas. They were all working together. They're still working together, but they were all working together in March 2020 and broadcasting what they were doing together with um, the teachers unions and other unions that were aligned with them, trying to really overthrow our government. And Trump was president at that time. And Randy Weingarten in March 2020 was on a Zoom call with Jane Fonda, who is worth like $200 million. And, you know her as Hanoi Jane from, protesting the Vietnam War, a real seasoned activist. And I'd say probably a communist, right? Um, I think I even read that she adopted one of the Weather Underground's kids after
Hmm.
they went to prison. I mean, she is like as hardcore activist as there is. And so sorry, this is kind of like a meandering way of saying that in March 2020, while we were sanitizing our groceries, and I have to admit it, they were having calls planning how to change the government. They needed to change elections, is what Randy Weingarten said. They needed to get rid of Trump. They needed to bring in their own people. And they were talking about how to change society to transform it into their vision of society, which I think we're seeing now. It's a very slow process, but I think they've been pretty successful. And Jane Fonda said something that was riveting, which was that COVID is God's gift to the left. She actually said that and cackled. She said, we have one crisis, the COVID crisis, and another crisis. That's all their justice, like, agendas. She said, we don't have the time or the resources to do them separately. We have to do them together. She said this. And this was in early 2020, right? So think about the public face that each of these people had, where they were like, oh my God, it's not safe, it's dangerous, like you have to be careful, you have to be sensitive, but the underprivileged community, we need to close schools for the Black community, we need to close schools for teachers. But when they were speaking amongst themselves, the virus was not even like on the agenda. It was really about, this is great. Now we have penetration of this ecosystem. Now, how do we transform it as quickly as possible? And we're heading towards election. We need to get Biden into office. Biden's going to open up all the floodgates to the illegal immigration that's going to transform our country. And once he's got them in here, we have this country forever. It was really about breaching the borders of this country and this society. And I think they almost got away with it. Whether they did or they didn't, we'll know, I guess in a generation and maybe sooner. But I think that they made incredible progress. They got Trump. Trump, I think, would have had a second term, but he was listening to really terrible experts like Fauci, who was manipulating him and lying. And Fauci had mishandled the AIDS epidemic before that. So Fauci was the perfect person to be, this Machiavellian character who was the science, like he made Trump look like, the bad guy, right? Fauci was the good guy, Trump was the bad guy. Fauci, put him in a position where he had to kind of trust him. He had all this experience. He was also from New York. Like I'm sure, Trump probably deferred to him on far too many things. Fauci and Birx, his acolyte. Scott Atlas talks about the fact that he was brought to Washington to advise Trump on COVID matters. He was supposed to be a COVID advisor, and Fauci and Birx like stopped that relationship, and he got sent back. He was only in Washington for a few months, if that. Maybe I'm overstating that, but he had to go back to Stanford because he actually couldn't get Trump's ear. Now, if Atlas had gotten Trump's ear, maybe Trump could have, gotten a hold of the situation quicker and been able to get that second term. And then I think we'd be in even better shape than we are today. But yes, anyway, so that's a really like meandering way of saying um, the same people who were orchestrating all of the closures and the mitigations that really kind of divided society during COVID and also transformed our schools, because the schools the kids came back to really weren't the schools they left. It was a bait and
Yeah.
switch. Are still very much forces to be reckoned with. Where we have the ICE, protests and violence against ICE and really trying to poison people against our own agencies. We have the No Kings parades. where I see elderly people walking around with signs calling for the lynchings of our president and other secretaries in our cabinets. Like, I've never seen that before. That's definitely new. And by the way, Jane Fonda said that was one of her goals on a different Zoom that we watched. She was speaking to one of the founders of the Sunrise Movement, a young activist, also DSA member, I'm sure. And she said, Jane Fonda said to this activist, she said, you and I, we're like bookends. You radicalize the young, I radicalize the old. She's like, can you
Mhm.
believe that there are people my age, and Jane Fonda's in her 80s, who've never gotten arrested, who've never really stood up for anything? This is our opportunity. We can radicalize them. And then I went to the No Kings March in New York a few months ago, and I saw them, and I was like, wow, Jane Fonda was incredibly successful. So we're still in that playbook. I mean, that was just that COVID was one of the entry points. Some people will say it happened far sooner than that. I don't know. That's when I started paying attention, but we haven't made it through yet. I mean, I live in a city where we have a DSA mayor who is weaponizing every single tool that he has available to the point where like one of his senior advisors was planning to meet with an IRGC, Iranian National like Guard officer in New York during the UN meetings. I mean, that's completely treasonous, and this was sanctioned, by the office. He claims he didn't know anything about it. So I don't think we're anywhere near the end.
Is the goal socialism? Is that the goal? I mean, because the thread is clearly tyranny, but against whom, right? There's this very palpable us versus them thing, like who's the us, who's the them, who is merely a flying monkey for the people who are pulling the strings, the fundings. Like, I'm thinking back to my own governor here in Nevada, and the school shut down on the map. Like, there's people who are lower tier. Governor of a state is not low tier, but it is compared to the people who have hundreds of millions of dollars in funding that are just doing the bidding, right? Maybe they see an opportunity for themselves down the road if they go along with the machine or whatever it is. And I can't help but think back to, Animal Farm, where it's like, well, all the animals will be equal except for the animals who are just a little more equal, right? Like, is it that these people who are coordinating these efforts, um, they just see themselves as being in charge once the change happens or the takeover occurs? Like, is that the motif? And the reason I'm asking this is because as a mental health guy, I see people suffering trying to discern what's going on, truth from falsehood, reality from cartoon world, as my good friend Christian Conti would call it, the world of shoulds. Um, and if we ripple down into the schools, if the school children are being fed falsehoods that their own lying eyes are telling them are false, but they're told not to believe their own lying eyes, then they end up in my clinic and I have to present some framework, some moral anchoring, some structure, some direction. And my profession probably is at the epicenter of a lot of this, where we're not supposed to do that. We're just supposed to be the sandbox in which everybody plays. It's like, well, if all of real life has gotten squishy and gray, then no one knows what's going on, and all our minds are susceptible to whatever the top-down authoritarians want us to believe, which makes it much easier with the digitization of everything. I mean, they're rewriting books and movies even. And no crack on George Lucas. He did what he did in the late 90s with Star Wars just to enhance it. But it's really hard to find an original copy of Star Wars anymore that doesn't have CGI animals in it at Mos Eisley, right? Like, that's an example of how long-term media can be changed to sculpt a different vision for the regime that's in charge. And if I ask if the end goal is communism or socialism, well, then at least the free speech people who believe in inalienable rights and the principles of this country can anchor themselves and say, we know what we're fighting, right? So I don't know. I ask you that because you've been up to your eyeballs in this. Um, there's got to be a goal, and how do you know when you get there if you're quote unquote them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of foreign interference in this country. There's been plenty of
I could
reporting
be too,
done.
yeah.
Azra Nomani, who is an independent journalist who now works with Fox as their senior investigative reporter, has done a lot of the tracing. to China and Neville Singham, who runs the People's Party here in New York City. We know Qatar has invested billions and billions of dollars in our education system from K to 12 through higher ed. China, it has been very much at the forefront here. So I think that they're trying to, pretty much end the experiment, end American exceptionalism. James Lindsay writes about this quite a lot,
He
and
does.
the Alexander Dugin, Russian, nihilist who believes in having a multipolar world where like now we have is it a unipolar world, the United States and Western Europe or whatever, and they're trying to make the poles like China and Iran and Russia and like basically the axis of evil would be the powerful entities in this world, and the United States would be another channel for them to to rule. So I don't know exactly what the end goal is, but it certainly is part of it is to destroy our constitution, erode faith in our founding principles and civics. Certainly, our children are not learning very much in school, in public schools anymore. And the things they are learning, I would argue they shouldn't be learning. So
Well,
it's worse.
they're learning collectivism largely, and
Yeah,
if you're a collectivist, you have no identity, which strikes right at the heart of what I'm supposed to be doing for a living, which is help people create and establish an identity so that they can live fruitful lives, believing in themselves and following their hopes, dreams, wishes, establishing families, all that stuff. And if you can erode somebody's sense of identity to the point that they can then be shaped by whatever you're telling them they need to be, uh, you got a population of robots at that point. They're easily controlled, which is why free speech is so important. If you don't have free speech, if you don't have the free exercise of religion, if you don't have a freedom of the press, if you don't have firearms to back up the allowance of free speech, if you got courts that interpret laws poorly or to an alternative end, and I believe that's why they the leftist collectivists in this country want to pack the Supreme Court and augment it is
yeah.
so they can install their own people and really, like you said, destroy all the laws upon which this, society sits. Um, then you have people who don't have an anchoring, which I get. I mean, what did they do in the Soviet Union? They eliminated exercise of religion because
Right.
if if the state can become God, then the people worship the state and not actual God, and then no one's accountable to actual God. It's all man-made, and if you can become God of your own universe, that's a pretty powerful position to be in, especially when you control the resources. Yeah, that's
And look at what
pretty
they've done
dark.
with religion. I mean, so many churches and synagogues now fly the
The
LGBTQ
trans flag.
flag.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, I find that so just disturbing. There are no words. And I there was a really surprising article that I read in 2022 about how Francis Collins made a very aggressive push into religious institutions, Jewish and Christian, and wrote them letters basically saying that they better comply with the COVID mandate or else. And he's a Catholic, and so I think he had a lot of weight, certainly with the Catholic Church. I don't know about the others. Then you have the Unitarian Universalist Association, all the Unitarian churches around the country that are very aligned with the UN and the UN principles, which some might think are kind of communist as well. Um,
Well, certainly
so
globalist, right?
yeah,
And that's collectivist in nature, and collectivism by nature flies straight in the face of individualism. And individualism, if you're created in God's image, that's a direct assault on Genesis and God's creation. You're essentially saying if go back to the trans thing, it's like if you give permission to say you're born in the wrong body, you're essentially saying God makes mistakes.
right.
So well, if God makes mistakes, well then I can't trust God. So then all religion crumbles. I mean, at least all the Abrahamic religions. Yeah, that's very dark.
But
No
if
wonder
you
people are anxious.
go to the Universalist Unitarian Universalist Foundation Association, whatever it is, and look at their principles and what they believe and what they're trying to do. And I think you have a blueprint. First of all, they very much align with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. They have lots of money. If you we've combed, I have a researcher, a friend out in Colorado who's combed through the financial records. It's pretty astonishing how much money they've funneled into different countries, like third world countries. What they're doing there, who knows? But you know, it's always like it always like preaches kindness and love and unconditional, you know, forgiveness. But I think it's exactly the opposite. It's all very, very sociopathic, and it's really meant to erode the parent-child relationship, the relationship with God, the relationship with country, and also, even worse than all of those things, instill this really horrific guilt on people for being American and for, you know, a hatred of our country. You know, something that I, I wasn't really thinking to talk about here, but something that bothers me tremendously, and I don't know how much you see this in Nevada, but young women, I think, you know, 18 to like 35 and up at this point, like anywhere I go, they're tattooed like they're wearing sleeves of tattoos. Some of them their chests, some of them their faces, their necks, every observable bit of their bodies has some kind of ink on it. This is not something that we have ever seen before, at least not in the United States. I mean, the change has been so drastic and profound. And I think that it's in part because they're ashamed to even be in their own skin. Like, how can you possibly, as a professional woman, have your hands tattooed, their fingers tattooed, your neck tattooed? This, like, you know, like one tattoo somewhere that you can hide with a shirt is one thing. That's not what's happening. And I think it's a symptom. They're trying to manifest like the illness, like, and make it physical so that, you know, they have something. Like, I don't know. I don't. You can probably explain it better than I can. But I know there are also connections to trafficking and past abuse. I'm sure that there, you know, there's a lot more than that too.
I hadn't thought about that until right now, so I'm cautious to form an opinion on it. But if I could venture a guess, I would say that the sudden emergence of it probably is very similar to the sudden emergence of identity disorders broadly. Everybody fixates on identity, but it's all identities because if you erode an individual's identity because you've inserted, say, the state into the family and you've convinced parents that they need to outsource their parenting to the schools or the therapist's office, then people who don't have an anchoring, they will reach for something. And when you have a whole collective bunch of people who all have no identity, they're just mirroring off of each other, and it becomes a funhouse of identity grabbing. One looks more popular than the other, one looks more tantalizing, one looks more powerful, one fills some need. And absent that, what do you do? Mark yourself, right? That would make sense. Once upon a time, and I know many people who have many tattoos, it was symbolic and it was representative of something internal. I don't see that as much anymore. I see it more as decoration, which would seem to be an outward reflection of the grasping for something internal. So that's my initial reflection. I think you're probably onto something. It's yet a symptom of a larger issue of completely unmoored people who have no direction in life. And when you mentioned women, but there's been an assault on femininity and masculinity simultaneously over the last several years, and I got to believe that that's all part of the same sinister undercurrent of erosion of
Yeah.
personal autonomy and individuality. I mean, shoot, even the Smithsonian came out in 2020 with that little flyer on, what is white culture? It's like rugged individualism. It's like, I don't know that that's that has anything to do with race, but there's yet another
Yep.
attempt to create division and pit people against each other for the purposes of what? Well, if you fall apart from the inside, it's easier to take over from the outside. So,
Mhm. And
maybe that's part
uglification.
of
I
what's
mean,
going on.
a lot of these women, they're not just tattooed, and I mean when I
Mm.
say tattooed, I mean profoundly tattooed.
Yeah,
They're
I
not.
know. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can send you pictures. Like just being on the subway in New York City yesterday for an hour, my husband was laughing because there were like four women who were under 35 standing around me who like it's not like anything I've ever seen before. And now I see it all the time, but up until like it just started like a year or two ago. Before that, I'd never seen anything like it. But usually these women also have like tons of facial piercings and ear
Yep.
piercings, and it's like they're trying to make themselves androgynous, unattractive, and not feminine. Like toxic masculinity now has a sibling, toxic femininity.
Absolutely.
And,
Oh, absolutely it does. There's some
and
deep, I mean, we don't have time on this to go into it, but there's some deep psychoanalytic dynamics that could be explored in great detail and depth. And to that point, for the listening audience, because we haven't covered it, and we do have some clinicians who listen, um, the erasure of psychodynamic theory in the grad school curriculum is alarming to me as we've shifted more toward the behaviorist stuff because when you do that, people become just time plus matter plus chance, and you're just modifying their behaviors as opposed to asking, who are you at your core, right? Who are you meant to be? And if you don't have that, makes treatment a lot easier because you could just say, well, I treated the smoking, now they're cured. It's like you ask why they were smoking in the first place, or why they were anxious, or why they had mood disorders. Um, it's definitely worth a deeper conversation. There's some people who cover it quite well, but yeah, it's not great. Yeah, you wanna talk a little bit about the upcoming documentary that you're doing too?
oh,
You
uncancelable,
should
it's out.
probably.
We
Oh,
we
it is.
released it. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
silly me for not paying attention.
well, no, but I mean, there's another documentary that I'm working on after that one, which I think you'll be interested in. But Uncancelable is a short 23-minute film about somebody who definitely embodies free speech. My friend Maud Marin, who was an open schools parent here in New York City and a former public defender with Legal Aid Society, a Bernie bro, super progressive and woke until she saw what was happening in the schools, and she was a school board member, and it was George Floyd and the closures, and that kind of awakened her, and she was constantly speaking up about some of the DEI stuff that school board members here in New York City were being forced to adhere to, and she was they tried to silence her. She'd been removed from the school board. She sued and got back on. She wrote op-eds. She lost her job at the Legal Aid Society. She has been relentless in pushing back against tyranny, which is, I think, really interesting because, most of the people I know who have done this are, well, I'm not most, I shouldn't say most, but many are immigrants or like have come from totalitarian countries like I have. Maud is an American, born in the United States, raised in the United States, went to Columbia University, so, super intellectual family, and still was able to somehow go against, the establishment. And I think that's fascinating too. Um, and she ran for DA against the incumbent, Alvin Bragg, in Manhattan in 2025. Of course, she never had a chance to win because she ran as a Republican and it's a solid blue city. Still, she managed to get 100,000 votes, which I think is huge. And Maud's perspective on all of this has often been, well, even if I can't win, because she's run several other campaigns, I can get my voice heard and my issues on the agenda and, moving the Overton window to make things, unspeakable, speakable. So the film is about her and about some of the interesting things that have happened to her in the last 6 years, including, there's a dad who held a black baby on his lap while he was talking about screen schools and gifted and talented programs in 2020. It was a Zoom call, it was a school board meeting. She was the head of the school board. There was tons of pressure to have her censure him, and all this reproach on him for being a white man holding a black child. And it became an Atlantic article. We cover that story. There's also her passing a resolution a couple of years ago to look into whether boys should be playing in girls' public school sports. It was a resolution just to kind of study, the impacts of that. And for having written that resolution and getting it passed, she got harassed by trans activists at every subsequent school board meeting. They showed up, they disrupted, they booed, they hissed, they slammed chairs down. She had to get escorted with security guards, and eventually she was voted off the board and the resolution was rescinded. So just that whole trajectory, I think it's a great time capsule of this era in New York City. It's kind of gritty. I like films very, very gritty. I'm a big Scorsese fan, like, New York City, mean streets. And I think people enjoy it. It's on Real Clear Politics.
Right
It's
on. So uncancelable, 15 days, and what's the third one?
So the third one is going to be a bigger film than the first two, I hope. Eli Steele, who I mentioned, he's a celebrated filmmaker. He has White Guilt coming out shortly about his father's book and the current era. He's going to be directing, and I'm producing a film called The Wrong Door about Dr. Eitan Haim in Texas. You're nodding, you know who he is,
I
right?
know.
Do
Yep,
you want
yep.
to do you want to say what you know about him, or should I introduce
Uh,
you?
no, you go ahead and do
Okay.
it.
Eitan Haim is a Texas surgeon who was a surgical resident at Texas Children's Hospital, which is the largest children's hospital in the country and maybe in the world. And he saw that they were implanting puberty blockers on children as young as 11 years old, even after it was outlawed in Texas and they were hiding it. And he blew the whistle. He did not reveal any personally identifiable information, was very well aware of HIPAA laws and did not violate a single law. His wife is an attorney and was like in the attorney general's office at the time, so he was very, very careful. Because he blew the whistle, he should have been protected, but he wasn't. The Biden DOJ came after him, charged him with multiple counts of felony, and he was looking at 10 years in prison for blowing the whistle on this children's hospital. And it's an incredible story of corruption at every level and lawfare. And if President Trump had not been elected, uh, Eitan probably would
You'd be
be
in
in
prison.
prison
Yep.
right now. He wouldn't have seen, the birth of his first child, his daughter, Talia. But because President Trump, was made aware of Eitan's heroic story on January 25th, 2025. They dropped all charges against him and they dropped them with prejudice, meaning they can never be
Can't
brought
bring him
again.
back.
But Eitan does have a civil case against Texas Children's that's still ongoing, funded by Elon Musk. And through that process, there's been quite a bit of discovery, and the details about this case are astonishing.
Yeah, I didn't know that part about the civil case and Elon funding it, but it's fascinating to me because it just shows how dangerous it can be, not just reputationally, but or financially or legally, but physically, because these people are psychopaths that want to push this agenda because they'll stop at nothing, and truth doesn't matter. They'll warp truth. You familiar with Josh Slocum, by the way?
No,
Joshua Slocum, Disaffected podcast. Um, I'll I'll hook up with you afterward and introduce you to his stuff. He's great. Also, friend of the show. Um, we look at it through a cluster B personality disordered lens, and systems can be cluster B disordered. Narcissistic, histrionic, antisocial, and borderline. You mentioned psychopathic earlier, sociopathic. That's that's what it is. They don't care about humans at all. They care about power and control, and it's like, well, they got a lot of power. Jane Fonda has a lot of power. Whoever's running the world has a lot of power. It's like how much could they need? More than what? More. Well, they have a lot more. And once you really wrap your head around that, it becomes a little clearer to understand the dynamics, but it's always more. And I think that's the sinister nature of the socialist agenda is that there's always more. There's always more to take from someone, and they'll do it through any means necessary, which makes it really hard to endure as an individual trying to navigate the system that's broken, trying to do the right thing. And then, like I said, people end up at, hiring me to work through their mental health with them because they're being made crazy by crazy people. It's
Did you
not
ever
good.
watch the Kevin Spacey House of Cards on Netflix?
I never did.
It's pretty dark. Like it really is. It's really, really, really dark. But he's a sociopathic, I can't remember what he is. Like eventually he become I don't think he ever becomes the president, but whatever he is, a very high powered official. And at some point, there's another guy running against him who's really good and getting a lot of attention. And Robin Wright is Kevin Spacey's wife and accomplice in the show. And he admits to her that he's concerned about this other contender. Like, is he going to lose his role? And she looks at him and she goes, "He is really good." And he was like, "Yes." And she's like, "But there's something different between us and them. There's nothing we won't do."
Yeah.
And I think of that line frequently. It's like when you're truly sociopathic and there is no bottom, like
Yep.
it's it's a shapeshifter, right? Like how do you it
Yeah, screen makers and film writers, screen makers. I guess you could make screens.
it's
Screenwriters and filmmakers, they don't pull this from nothing. This is from time immemorial. It's been with humans since our inception on the planet, and these forces have been studied and written about. The Stoics wrote about it. The great philosophers, the origins, the originators of my profession. They study this stuff. So this isn't new. It's just trying to discern the pattern of what's next so we can combat it properly so that we do provide life and love and beauty and harmony to this world and not succumb to the darkness. It's always going to be a tension. I mean, the Taoists even have the symbol of the yin and the yang, right? There's the light and the dark, and they're in balance, but there's a little bit of each in the other side. And it's fascinating stuff for me. It's why I love this profession because the depth of the human soul is limitless. Unfortunately, that includes the terrible as well as the great. Thank you. I want to honor your time, and I have a full bladder and I need to go pee. But I really appreciate meeting you. It's amazing that we haven't connected over the last 6 years, even though we've been in the same Venn diagram overlapping. So thanks for making the time, and I'm glad to get to chat with you. And tell everybody where they can find you, please.
Oh, yeah, thanks so much. It's really great to connect with you too. RestoreChildhood.com has all the links. Most of the writing and everything we do is posted on our Substack, and there's a link to the Restore Childhood Substack on the website.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you want to support, how can they support? Subscribe, is that it?
They can subscribe. We're a nonprofit. So, if you want to support our work, you can either sign up for a paid subscription or donate at restorechildhood.com. You can watch the film 15 days. Again, there's a link on there because I don't want to like throw a lot of links out there. Restorechildhood.com is kind of like the hub. There's not a lot going on that website, but the t-shirt, is available for sale on that website and, all the links to the different things that we have going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. We could probably spend another show talking about technology in schools too, but we'll save that for maybe
The next
part
time.
two. Yeah. Natalia Murakhver, thank you very much. And on behalf of our Naga Notes team and the Zephyr Wellness family, share this around if you think it'll help better humanity. That's what we're trying to do is make Earth better. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.